My name is Michael Price for meaningoflife.tv, and today I'm going to be speaking with Greg Epstein, who is the Humanist chaplain at Harvard University and has been since 2005. Greg is a highly influential public figure in humanism in the United States and internationally. And he was the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Good Without God, What a Billion Non-Religious People Do Believe. And he's working on a new book, I hear. So thanks a lot, Greg, for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to talk to you.
I think you know, Greg, I'm an evolutionary psychologist at Brunel University, London, and I'm really interested in the extent to which human nature is adapted for close-knit community life as a source of social support and ritual and cultural meaning. And really interested in the extent to which secular organizations like the Humanists could be a source of those sorts of benefits for people that have traditionally been provided by organized religion. And so today, that's really the main question I hope to address, because I don't think there's many people more qualified than you to speak about experiences you've had in building those sorts of secular communities.
Well, there's more and more people doing it, which is a great thing. When I got started building secular community, building humanist community, I was told that that sort of thing was dead. That it was about a decade ago, give or take, and I've been in my job for 10, 11 years, and I was just told that secular religion is dead. Not that I call it secular religion. That word or that phrase doesn't really resonate with me that much, but that's what I was told. That people heard about what I was doing and they said, no, that's not going to work anymore. But there's just so many people who are getting involved in this kind of thing.
That's great. I'm really interested. Was really interested to find out, to learn that Harvard actually has a humanist chaplain, and it sounds like a fantastic job, a really interesting job. And could you say a few things just about what experiences led you to this job, to this role?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, first of all, every day I get an email from one, maybe on a busy day, two people who say that they're so excited about the job that they want to do it themselves. And I just need to caution people a little bit that this is not a cushy, easy position that you come to a university and they just pay you buckets of money to create community for atheists.
Mhm.
It's really not like that. In fact, Harvard University doesn't pay me any money whatsoever, and it doesn't pay the organization that I direct, the Humanist Hub and the Humanist community at Harvard, any money whatsoever. We get a budget of $0 and 0 cents reliably from Harvard. So anybody out there thinking, wow, I got to dive into this head first, hold on. It's an amazing job. It's an amazing career. It's an amazing field to be in. And there are more and more actual jobs in this field, but it's not that easy.
Now,
Um,
am I right
yeah, go
that
ahead.
Harvard's had a humanist chaplain since the late 1970s?
The late 70s, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you the story really quickly. So in the 1970s, along to Harvard came a man named Tom Ferrick.
Hmm.
Tom became the first ever humanist chaplain at any institution in the United States. Not the first humanist chaplain in the world, by the way. Those were in the Dutch armed forces a
Oh,
few
yeah.
years earlier. But Tom was from this part of the country, from Massachusetts, not far from here. And he was raised as an orphan during the Great Depression by the Catholic Church.
Hmm.
So all Tom ever knew was a religious environment, the Catholic Church environment. He had good experiences. He was helped along the way by good, caring, serious priests who wanted to make the world a better place, Jesuits among others. And that was all Tom ever intended to do with his life, was go into the priesthood. So he went right through Catholic schools, seminary. He was assigned to be the assistant Catholic chaplain at Dartmouth in the early 60s. And it was a time of revolution. And Tom pledged to be really open with the students and listen to everything that they had to say. And they talked him right out of believing in God.
Uh-huh.
And it was a real shakeup for him. He was also discovering that he was a gay man, and that didn't go over very well with the theology that he had been taught. And
Hmm.
then he described it that the Catholic Church's Vatican II policy on birth control, where they failed to decide to accept birth control, really just put him over the edge. Like, this is inhumane. This is going to be really bad for human beings overall. And at that point, he had to get out, but he didn't know what to get into, and this is still what he wanted to do with his life. And so he ultimately carved out a career, first through something called the Ethical Culture Societies,
Hmm.
which were a group of were and are a group of secular or humanist communities that were founded in the 1870s, and some still continue to this day, some very successfully,
Hmm.
actually. And first through that, that brought him to be the leader of the Ethical Society of Boston briefly, and then he knocked on the door of Harvard and said, "How about the first ever chaplain for the rest of us, for
Oh.
the non-religious, for humanists, atheists, agnostics, etc." And Harvard at that point didn't really know what to say. They said, "Okay, fine, we'll give this a try. You'll be gone in a couple years anyway, so what skin is it off our back?" And 40 years later, here we are. Tom survived living a very modest existence. He really lived like an ascetic priest for most of his life, all of his life. He never owned a house, he never owned a car, never had a family or kids or what have you, but he really devoted his life to starting this chaplaincy. And I met him when I was a young man, early 20s, studying this sort of work, and fell in love with the idea. And 10 years ago, almost to the day today, I took over for him.
Okay, so you're the only the second chaplain that humanist chaplain that Harvard's had then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, not exactly, because I started out as his assistant chaplain.
Okay.
I was the first paid assistant chaplain that he ever had, and I was his assistant chaplain for a year, 11 years, starting 11 years ago, and then took over for him 10 years ago. And I've been very fortunate to supervise the work of a handful of incredibly talented assistant chaplains since then. So
Right.
there have been several chaplains. Just I'm the director of the organization
I
currently.
see. Okay. And in your organization then, to what extent is it functioning similar to a traditional church? Do you have weekly services?
It's evolved a lot. So if there's anybody who's watching this who checked us out years ago in one capacity or another and hasn't been back in the last year or two, it really has evolved a lot. And it's
Mhm.
been fascinating to watch it grow, to watch this idea of a community for humanists, atheists, agnostics, and allies. We welcome religious allies to come to our programs. I'll talk about that later, maybe,
Okay.
to grow. But so we do now. Let's focus on what it is now. I should say a bit about what it used to be, because when I started, what I now direct is and was a nonprofit organization.
Hmm.
We were called the Humanist Chaplaincy at Harvard, but we're not funded by Harvard. We're independently funded. We had a $28,000 annual budget when I started, and we basically served a handful of Harvard students. That was it. You know, there were a handful of Harvard students who, at that point in 2004 or 5, identified as humanist, atheist, agnostic, and were actively involved with our organization. And I was a counselor to them. I was a helper to them, an organizer for them. But it grew really, really quickly once we sort of started putting energy into this idea that maybe this could be bigger, maybe it could be more. And it's grown out of control
Yeah.
since then. And now we have our own center. It is right in the middle of Harvard Square. It's 3,200 square feet. It is packed almost every day
Hmm.
with humanist and secular programs. We do meet. Our main meeting is on Sunday.
Hmm.
Ironically enough, hey,
Hmm.
it's when people have free time.
Hmm.
But we meet at 1:30 p.m. That's the biggest public event that we do every single week, because we still find that atheists don't really want to get up early on Sunday morning to go to atheism meetings.
Hmm.
But the meetings are a lot of fun. They're crowded, they're busy, they're energetic, and they're every single week now.
So, okay, that's really interesting. I didn't realize what a full schedule you really had. So stuff's
Yeah.
going on just all day, every day, it sounds
Yeah,
like.
this is like
Yeah.
it's becoming like the 92nd Street Y for humanists, if people know that institution.
So can we talk a little bit about so the title of your 2009 book was Good Without God: What a Billion Non-Religious People Do Believe. Can we talk a little bit about the sorts of beliefs and values that you guys that brings the humanists in your group together?
Sure.
Um, and so basically, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but what the values I most associate with humanism tend to be how do you treat other people, social values, and those tend to be just be nice to people, emphasis on compassion and inclusivity. And then the other side of it is how should we understand the world? And these
Yeah.
have to do with reason and science. And that, for the most part, is that's what gets emphasized most of all. Those sort of two kinds of values. Are there other key values to humanism, or do you think is this really the core of it?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, Michael, it is that simple, and on the other hand, it really isn't.
Hmm.
You, in your excellent article, without which I don't think we would be speaking. I mean, you really got my attention with your article about the world needing a secular community revolution. One of the things that you talked about that I liked was that communities like ours should strive to present our values both positively and simply,
Hmm.
so that they can be easily understood. And I think I agree with you. I think we have tried to do that. And so I'll try to give you a simple sense of the ideas that we try to put out there. But just understand that one of the things that we're trying to say as an organization is that there are no popes, there are no individuals that can just sort of decide what an entire community of humanists should be or do or believe.
Uh-huh.
And that's really not my role. My
Right.
role is to be a kind of curator for the interests and beliefs of others. Although I certainly do have my own opinions and my own beliefs that I'm passionate about, and at times I try to take a leading role in advocating for those beliefs. But there's no such thing as a humanist community where one guy like me just says this is what we all believe and let's go and march on it.
Okay.
But anyway, in terms of Good Without God, what I wanted to do at that point in time, this was 2009 or and 10 when the book came out,
Hmm.
was right around the time that the new atheists, as they're called, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, etc.,
Hmm.
had been publishing a sort of steady stream of best-selling books. And I found it really fascinating that America seemed to really be ready for mainstream publications, best-selling books that were getting major attention from a cross-section of society, to talk about what atheists do not believe in. I think that's important. It's important to know what you disagree with in life, because otherwise, you can be influenced by anything. But I also think it's really important, and if I had to pick one versus the other, which I don't, it's an artificial choice. But if I had to pick one, I would pick it's even more important to know what we do believe.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to talk about what humanists and the non-religious do believe in a positive way. And so talked about the idea of how we construct a meaning or purpose of life appropriate to this channel, as I understand,
Uh-huh.
um, from a secular, non-theistic perspective, and how we define what is good, what is ethical, what methods we define that by, and even to look at some individual actions and what we might say about what's good and what's bad. And I ended the book with the idea that ultimately one thing that would be really good for people who are living lives without a God, without a supernatural presence as something we believe in, um, would be to form communities. That community really is at the heart of what human beings can do for one another to make this life good and meaningful. And that's really the emphasis of the book. That's why this next book that I'm working on with a great co-author named James Croft, which will come out in about a year, is really all about the idea of the secular community, the humanist community, the godless congregation.
Okay, so really, the community itself is front and center when it comes to when what humanists say brings meaning to life. It really emphasizes the community itself.
Yeah, but well, from my perspective, it should, and I'm really thrilled to say that when that book came out, that was probably the most controversial aspect of the book, other than maybe the idea that we should work collaboratively and cooperatively with religious people, which I also argued for and continue to do.
Okay.
Those were probably the two most controversial aspects of the book back in 29 and 2010.
Uh-huh.
But since then, I think that a really big consensus has been built. Not to say that everybody agrees today, but that a huge number of the people who are involved in something called a secular movement or a humanist movement
Mm-hmm.
have now started both collaborating with religious people on common projects
Mm-hmm.
and building secular communities. It's amazing to see the transformation, and I can't wait to see what comes next.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. On this topic of meaning, since as you know, this is Meaning of Life TV. So,
Yeah,
let me just ask a couple more questions about meaning from a maybe a more traditional religious perspective. I mean,
sure.
do you think it's possible that life could actually have some kind of higher order meaning or purpose? So what I mean by that is the concept of function is very commonplace in biology. Of course, it's how evolutionary biologists understand the operation of adaptations. The function of adaptations function to solve some kind of problem related to survival or reproduction. So
Hmm.
in that sense, uh, evolved aspects of organisms have meaning, they have function. Do you think human life, human existence, could have some kind of sort of analogous, scientifically discoverable function?
Well, I mean, it really it depends on how you're looking at it. I mean, the idea, on the one hand, the question is a simple one. It's, did some kind of outside, extra human, supernatural, or natural but far beyond anything that we've been able to discover in the world entity come along and put its cosmic finger or noodly appendage or whatever it would be uh, on humanity and start us off like a watchmaker god and say, go, do this, discover your purpose millions of years later. Yeah, that's one possibility, but that tends to me to be in the realm of uh, the Bertrand Russell orbiting space teapot. There could be an orbiting space teapot. We just haven't discovered it yet, but how likely is that?
Okay.
There could be a flying spaghetti monster. I think it's more likely by far that the ideas of purpose that we have created through religion, we created for our own human evolutionary purposes. And now that we have discovered that, there is plenty of possibility that we can live a life of deep meaning and purpose, but on a subjective, human created level.
Okay.
That now that we know who we are and what we are to a greater extent than ever before in human history, of course we want to live lives that are for something, that have some meaning, but we have to give our lives that meaning. No other person, no other religion, no other force out there is going to give us our purpose or allow us to just discover something objective. The humanistic perspective, I think, is we need to create that meaning subjectively.
Okay. So not dependent at all, in other words, on any kind of higher order transcendent meaning of life.
Right, right.
Everything
That
is
there's no single overarching transcendent meaning that was given to humans by something non-human. I mean that we've never discovered it, and furthermore, furthermore. If I don't know, you don't know either. Nobody knows, but there's
right.
no. We're very confident that we've never seen good evidence for such a thing, and even more so than that, the world is better off if we have to discover our own meaning and purpose than it would be if there was some objective meaning or purpose out there that we had to discover. And here's why I say that. If we go about our lives operating on the basis of the idea that the meaning of life is to be discovered, then what's going to happen is we're going to be constantly turning to other human beings, to texts, to scrawlings on cave walls, whatever it would be, saying, tell me the meaning of life, please. And then we're going to be subject to whoever's charismatic, to whoever, can sort of portray themselves as having authority. And when, some president, some general, some high leader says to us, go to war, for example, fight for this cause, take up arms, we're going to have to say, well, okay, the objective meaning of life, I don't. So therefore, I have to go and die for your cause. But if we're all in agreement that we are intersubjectively creating the meaning of life, that we are creating together a meaning and a purpose to our human existence that's emerging, then nobody can ever order us to go to war and have us have to obey them. We then have to debate. We have to discuss. We're going to get better outcomes that way.
Okay, very interesting. Thanks. So a related question about the meaning issue. So as a chaplain, I imagine that at times you might need to counsel people who are going through really, really traumatic times, people who are really grief-stricken or just very depressed, or possibly even dying or very ill. When you is that correct that you interact with people in such situations?
Of course, yes.
Yeah, and what do you tell them? Do you find that those people are seeking some kind of more supernatural source of comfort?
Yeah.
And
Well,
what do
some
you tell
are.
them?
I mean, some feel that they would like to find a supernatural source of comfort. Those aren't the most likely people to come to me, but it's not unheard of that somebody who would feel that way would still make their way to me and be talking to me about an issue of grief or loss or whatever. Sometimes I find myself talking to people who don't believe that there is such a thing, but find themselves wishing that there were. That's common too. The biggest thing that I learned that's enabled me to do better work in counseling people around grief and the hardest parts of life was that there's no one thing that I or any other person can say to make death better, to comfort absolutely. That when people die, it saddens and it hurts and affects those of us who are living, and that's a natural feeling. And when people die tragically or unfairly, it adds anger and extra pain to our grief. And my job, if I'm sitting with somebody, is to acknowledge that and to say, this really hurts and it's really awful, and I we all wish it weren't this way, but it is, and I'm so I really empathize with the pain that you're going through, and I care about you.
Okay. All right. So it's really compassion and empathy. It's not so much providing a sort of a supernatural secret to the meaning of life. It's just being there and being a source of
Yeah, I
empathy.
mean, people, I once heard somebody say that when a loved one died, what he most wanted was to feel the presence of God. Well, I disagree. When I'm going through times of grief, what I most want is to feel the presence of people. And what I find people really want and need is for the other people in their lives to show up for them, to really be there, so that we're not left alone to grieve in our room, in the dark, literally and figuratively. That we have, so in our community here, and especially this is the case in the past year or so. About a year and a half ago, we leased the space that I talked about earlier, and so now we have a physical space that people come to for a humanist community on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. And we, when we get together, for example, I said our biggest event is Sunday, and it's really big and crowded. And then we have small discussion groups that get together every Monday, and a lot of great people are coming back again and again, week after week, to these groups. At first, I felt almost guilty organizing them, because I thought, wait, these are really busy people. There are lawyers, there are scientists, there are people from every walk of life, students, and just people who are hustling, trying to make ends meet in
Mm-hmm.
our community. And I felt bad taking their time, asking them to come to something Sunday and then something Monday, and often other times it felt weird and totalitarian to me. But
Mm-hmm.
people come because they really like being around each other and they want to spend their free time meaningfully.
Uh-huh.
And so what we do every Monday, we meet and we ask people to start out the meeting by going through the rose and their thorn from the past week.
Huh.
What the best part of their past week was and what the worst part of their past week was. And people really look forward to it. You know, somebody will share that they're really worried in the coming week that they're not going to make a deadline at work, or they're not going to find a roommate, and people really come back the next week like, so did you make your deadline? Have you found your roommate yet? Is there anything I can do? And in that way, when somebody's parent has a stroke, when somebody gets into a bad accident, when somebody has a heart attack, I mean, these things have all happened just in the past few weeks in our community.
Uh-huh.
We take action. We sit with that person. We go through, what are the things that we can do? Can we cook you meals? Can we visit you in the hospital? Can we make your life better in some way? And if not through some kind of action, then just let's be here for you and let you talk about it. And it's really powerful to see.
Yeah. Okay. You've mentioned leadership a couple of times in our conversation
Hmm.
today, and especially how humanism doesn't have any sort of really authoritative figures or sources of ideology. And I guess what I'm wondering is, this is sort of a two-part question. Do you think humanism could have that kind of leadership, or if it's going to become, the second part of the question is, do you envision humanism ever becoming really a large-scale social movement, sort of international social movement on the scale of one of the big modern organized religions? And if so the big modern, the big world religions often they spread thanks to really pivotal, important leaders. So, do you think humanism could or should produce its own Moses or Jesus or Mohammed or a figure like that?
Moses was a fictional character, most likely. We know that from archaeology and other social sciences. But hey, that's fine. No, but seriously, short answer is yes. I think that there is that there's huge potential for a humanist or secular community movement. I think that there are millions and millions and millions of people out there who could benefit from having better and more effective communities. And I think that professionalism in those communities is incredibly important. That there will and do come points where communities are trying to form, and they find that there is a real need for the people who are leading or who are facilitating those communities to be well trained, to have a high set of expectations on them and a set of professional standards that they need to adhere to have a really effective mechanism for addressing issues that come up, including flaws in, inevitable flaws in whoever is in these leadership roles.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that the role of leaders, even having said that, can be exaggerated. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Moses, Jesus, some of those individuals actually existed.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all perhaps important, whether, in the story or in real life. But everybody who's ever been a great leader has had their role exaggerated by history. There are, if you go back to the great movements, the movements that have really made human life better and more meaningful, there have been thousands of people that have been working alongside any great individual leader whose name we might know,
Mm-hmm.
to improve that community. And I mean, Martin Luther King, just as an example, people should know the name A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph was one of the greatest Black civil rights leaders in the United States. Until Martin Luther King came along, Randolph was also one of the most famous. But King's fame just took off, and a lot of other names alongside his have been lost. but Randolph was a confirmed secular humanist, signed a document called the Humanist Manifesto 2, which was published in 1973, and really came at Black civil rights leadership from a secular and atheistic and humanistic point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But his name's been lost. We're going to have tons and tons of people who are going to get involved in humanist and secular community leadership. Some who will become better known than others. Some will become better known at times than others. But it's going to take a huge village and a very diverse set of women and men, people who are gay, straight, and have other, identities, who are from many different ethnic and racial and cultural backgrounds,
Mm-hmm.
and we're all going to have to do this together. And it's not going to be easy. We're not as skilled as we wish we were in figuring out how to work together and how to support one
Right.
another. There
Yeah.
are tendencies towards competitiveness and whatever,
Right.
but we're all going to have to do this together.
Yeah, that sort of leads on to a related question. So, I mean, it sounds like you see humanism as having the potential to become a much more influential political and social force in the world, and that
Yeah,
you think that would be a good thing.
I do.
Yeah, and then you mentioned, so one aspect that could facilitate that would be good leadership. Another thing would be, as you just alluded to, unification of. I mean, there's so many different groups, so many different secular organizations in the world. I think of the Humanists as probably the largest and most influential, but there's organizations like the Sunday Assembly that started here in London and has spread internationally. The Richard Dawkins Foundation, Freedom from Religion Foundation, and lots of groups that call themselves rationalists or atheists or secularists, etc. Do you think these groups could be more united? Or is there an advantage to maintaining this kind of diversity and fragmentation? And if you say united, what do you think the key is to really bringing all these different groups together?
I think that these groups can be more supportive and more cohesive. I don't think that it's necessary to get them all together and say, all right, we all have to collapse ourselves into one central organization and dissolve any differences or any stylistic differences between us. Because I'd say, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let people go out and start all different kinds of methods of organizing these communities, and it's going to take some time to figure itself out. Again, what I'm really interested in is, I'll give you a few ideas that I really want in my own community. And, if others disagree or have other areas of focus, then that's fine. But for me, I think that some of the things that we need in order to realize our huge potential and to become a major worldwide movement on par with, although different from, the major religious groups in the world. Some of them are, we need professionalism, like to be really serious about our communities. We need spaces in which to operate. We need well-trained leaders and facilitators. We need really beautiful art, music, drama. It needs to be fun and meaningful and engaging to come out and celebrate and be part of a humanist or secular community. There's so many different ways to do that, though. I mean, I love world music. I love poetry. But some use more comedy. I mean, there's all different ways to do it. I think there needs to be really meaningful support for our fellow community members. Whether it's helping people deal with death and grief, as you said, or just the idea of 8 hugs a day. We had a neuroeconomist named Paul Zak who has a great TED talk about oxytocin and love, and just like people really supporting each other on a visceral level. You need 8 hugs a day to have to be at optimum health in terms of your level of oxytocin, and just a warm community is something that's important to me. Families, kids, we're really, really active at the Humanist Hub now in terms of having a very active program designing a curriculum for the kids of non-religious or interfaith families to learn what it is to be a citizen of the world within a community, and that's become huge for us. I could go on.
Yeah, so yeah, very interesting. So it sounds like you think the actual meeting place and having face-to-face meetings, how essential an aspect to building secular communities do you think that is? Some people think maybe it could just be virtual, maybe it could all be done online. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, no question that online communities have been have had positive benefits on the world, but they're not sufficient. And to the extent that we rely on online life for our meeting our community needs, I think we really run some serious risks. Online worlds can do a tremendous amount for us in terms of helping us to get informed, helping us to get active around causes that are important. And they can even help us realize how many wonderful people there are to connect with. But face to face, in person contact, as you talk about in your article, Michael, is so key. And religions get that.
Mm-hmm.
And religions will continue to outcompete secular communities until we really recognize that face to face contact is just huge for our health. It's the research that I did showed, and you alluded to this too. It's that we need face-to-face communities as human beings the same way that we need to eat healthily and get exercise.
Right, right.
And people struggle with both of those things. You know, I know so many people, including myself, where, you know, I want to eat healthy,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes I just want ice cream, and
Yeah.
and I want to get exercise, but sometimes I'm just too lazy to go to the gym. And I want to reach out to community, but sometimes I'm just too introverted, or I'm just too inclined to stay at my
Yeah.
home
Or
and watch
yeah.
Netflix. But it's
Right.
really important.
Right. Yeah. I mean, modern life is structured in a way that can make it really difficult just to have the time to have face-to-face
Yeah,
meetings.
yeah,
And
and there's huge competition in our time. You
yeah,
know, we're taught that we need to work ourselves into the ground. That success requires slavish devotion to our jobs, and we're really pressured into this.
yeah.
You know, the big New York Times article about Amazon is just you know,
Hmm.
that just recently came out. Just one example of that. But a community of people that you get together with regularly
Uh-huh.
can be a source of the moral strength that is required to push back against that and say, you know, maybe I'm going to make $10,000, you know, fewer, you know, in a year, or in a what, I don't know what,
Hmm.
but you know, maybe it's an even bigger sacrifice, maybe not, I don't know.
Hmm.
But the point is that we can help each other to push back and say there are more important things than the certain kind of money and prestige that come from working ourselves to the bone and not having time for community.
Definitely. Yeah. Um, and a related issue that maybe this is people have asked you about this. It came up with me after I read that article you mentioned. Um, so you talk about kind of quasi-religious communities as a source of community, of this social support. But
Hmm.
people say, well, what about other kinds of community that aren't, it's not quasi-religious, it's just a bunch of friends getting together? So, you know, being on a community sports team that meets every week, or
Sure.
involved in a political action group,
Yep.
or a service club or a book club, or there's all
Yep.
kinds of sources of community that it's not religious, but it's also not exactly what you'd call secular community or
Yep.
quasi-religious. What do you think is what kind of elements? What is it about humanism that's providing these really important aspects that these other kinds of community aren't providing?
Yeah, those communities are great. It's really nothing against them, and I'm not saying to people that they should, you know, join our community at the expense of those kinds of communities, at all. Ideally, you'd have time for a few different kinds of community activities in your life. It's just that there, you know, a lot of us really do experience so much career pressure, or so much immediate family pressure, that it feels like there's no time, and one thing would be the maximum that we could possibly do. The argument for a community like ours, a secular or humanistic community, is that there's something incredibly powerful about a form of community that asks us to live a better life and be a better person
Right.
on our own terms. The best example of this, social scientifically speaking, is the sociologists Robert Putnam and Richard Campbell
Mm-hmm.
have a book called American Grace,
Mm-hmm.
which is a big doorstop of a book that is sort of like, it's considered the Kinsey study of American religion, and the most comprehensive study of American religious life. They found that people who actively attend a religious congregation in America are more likely to give up a seat on a bus. They're more likely to spend time with a friend in need. They're more likely to donate blood. In short, they're better neighbors than people who are not. But this has nothing to do in their research with belief in God. If a total atheist was attending a congregation in their research, maybe because they were going with their spouse or for some other reason, that person behaved just as well as the believers that they studied who were involved. And a totally convinced believer who would either not go to a congregation or who would go but just sit in the pews by themselves and not get involved, those people were not any better neighbors than average.
Okay.
And so the idea that they came up with is it's being part of a community that actually asks of you to be a good citizen of the community and of the world,
Okay.
and
So
in your own life, that makes the difference.
So it's that ethical aspect, that moral and ethical aspect that you think is the key difference.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be boring. You know, there's a lot of good social science to indicate that early communities, early human communities that looked at the meaning of life were incredibly joyful and had a huge amount of fun, and that the rituals were exciting. And you know, we need that too. That's a huge part of what our communities can look like.
Right. Yeah, and I guess some other aspects might be humanist. I mean, humanism has ceremonies like weddings and funerals, and so they
Oh
can
yeah.
provide be a source of ritual to mark the most important moments in a person's life.
Yeah,
And,
I mean, funerals, weddings, baby naming or welcoming ceremonies, and
Right.
now we're even starting to get into confirmation ceremonies
So you
for
could
our kids that are coming of age. It's huge. It's
Yeah.
huge, and they're really beautiful experiences.
And those are things you couldn't get from a book club or a sports team, for
Right,
example.
right. Yeah, I mean, you know, I even know many secularist groups that don't have anybody that's actively involved that's really well trained to provide those kind of ceremonies, or that there's no focus on them. You know, we have people where they're actively attending the community, and then you see them get pregnant, and they go through their pregnancy period, and then, you know, when they have their kid, it's like the entire community really wants to gather and celebrate with them. It would be disappointing to you know, be friends with somebody and go through life and be talking about the meaning of life with them, and then you see them have their first child, and there's no opportunity for a really meaningful party to celebrate that. And our community model encourages that, and it tries to advance that and have more and more of that.
And there's also that intergenerational aspect, which you've alluded to a couple of times.
It's really makes nice to see.
Yeah, it makes religious and secular humanist communities unique in that it really tries to bring all generations together, and it really is. You can't get that from most from a sports team, say.
Yeah, that's something that we really love at the Humanist Hub, is that, so we're working on diversity. It's not easy, as I wrote about in Good Without God, and I'm continuing to explore. It's not easy to build a community that's diverse. There are all sorts of social forces that push against diversity, and you really have to push for it if you want it. But so we're working on gender diversity, and that's getting better and better. In our community, we're working on diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, culture, and that's getting better. Although, you know, we've got a lot of work to do on that, but we're really taking that seriously.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of age diversity. We have people who are really connecting with one another, who are senior citizens, and who are teenagers, and who are everywhere in between, and it's really growing that in that sense.
Great, yeah. So that's very encouraging. What about so we've talked about unification a little bit. On that topic, one reaction to the article I wrote was also, in order for these communities to get together and really bond and really have a reason to get together, they need shared goals. Do you agree with that? Do you think that unification of within humanism and within all these different secular groups would be facilitated by having more shared goals? And if so, does humanism have any sort of wide ranging shared goals And if not, do you think it could, or what goals do you think it should have?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of shared goals, and these are not objective goals that everybody has to obey, but there are some real shared goals, and I'll give you an example. I mean, um, a lot of us in at the Humanist Hub community in the past year have been paying attention to the dialogue around race
Uh-huh.
in America today and have been watching some of these examples of horrific things happening to people, most likely because they are black.
Uh-huh.
And it's been really painful to watch the stories of Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Sandra Bland, et cetera, et cetera. And we've always in this community wanted to do something about um, race and injustice in society, but it just wasn't always clear to us that we could do something or that we should, what we could do or should do. But we've been really getting more and more galvanized towards action on some of those things together in the past year, and it's a good feeling to see that we're capable of coming together and trying to do something. It's not to say that every member by any stretch of the imagination is really actively excited about dealing with race issues, or that every one of our meetings has anything to do with that. It's only still a minority of our meetings where we really explore that issue.
Uh-huh.
But because the majority of people that come to our meetings are still white, we've tried a lot of diversity initiatives over the years, and they've had varying degrees of success. But the people who show up in our space more often than not tend to be people that you say are white, and we because we want humanism to look more like humanity.
Mm-hmm.
We finally decided that one thing we could do is take a class uh, and have it here in our space that is for people who basically are white or see themselves as white, and who want to get more educated as to how they could be an effective ally for people who are struggling with racism. And so we've been taking this course. I've been taking it alongside many of my members of the community. It's called White People Challenging Racism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been really interesting to see us move towards common action. We've been thinking about how could a community like ours be active on combating climate change. And in fact,
Uh-huh.
our children's program, which is really expanding this year. So I'd love to give you an update in about a year about how much more we're going to be doing with young kids and families.
Mm-hmm.
But that program is working with an organization called the Center for Earth Ethics, and its founder, Karenna Gore, the oldest daughter of Vice President Al Gore, to design a kids' curriculum teaching the children of secular and humanist and interfaith families about climate change and what we call earth ethics.
Uh-huh.
And it's going to be really interesting to work with people like the Gore family
Mm-hmm.
to teach this growing generation of
Mm-hmm.
secular and humanist kids what some of the practical issues and ethics are and how we can actually do something about them. I'm very excited to see what we come up with.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I'm glad you brought up climate change too, because that leads me to another question I had about. Well, humanism seems to be very forward-looking and concerned about the future, and focused on dealing with sort of big problems that humans face in the future. And I think part of this reason it's so forward-looking is it does have this commitment to science and reason, which means it has to be open to new ideas and new insights and new knowledge, and be able to incorporate those into its worldview. And by the same token, it doesn't seem to carry a lot of baggage in terms of tradition compared to traditional religions.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm wondering is, could that be? Do you see that as an advantage or a disadvantage to humanism? Because a lot of people I know who are religious, or who just have some kind of strong cultural identity, they really get into the tradition and the heritage of it, and that's a really important aspect of their identity.
mhm.
And so I'm wondering, do you think that could be a weakness? I mean, it certainly seems like a strength of humanism to me, but could it also be construed as a weakness?
I think we just need to be honest with ourselves that humanism and secular communities, they're going to have a lot of strengths and a lot of weaknesses. And we have to be willing to emphasize our strengths and be honest about our weaknesses. And so, yes, the fact that there are exuberant or meaningful or inspiring rituals in religions that believe in supernatural gods and ideas that we disbelieve in and in some cases really disapprove of, um, that can be a challenge for us because the ritual is there to bring people together more effectively.
Hmm.
And there are ways in which having a ritual that really takes you far beyond yourself, um, can really help us get out of our headspace and into our heart or our emotions and function more effectively as human beings. And these religious rituals have been designed over the course of thousands of years to do that effectively. So if we're going to leave them behind, if we're going to say, I signed a contract before I came to my job saying that I would not pray in publicly, not even as a metaphor will I pray to God
Hmm.
or do anything worshiping the supernatural, what have you. And I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
That said, people sometimes rely on certain verbal formulas that involve praying to God to get them out of their intellectual space and take them into a place where they can be more compassionate and
Right.
more relaxed and more feel more of a sense of thriving as a human being and flow. So we need to work on designing that and accept that we're going to be imperfect for a while, and that we're not trying to rewrite history in a day. We're just trying to live the best possible lives that we can,
Right.
to build the best social technologies we can, and and to connect with the earth around us. The one of the things that humanists do bring to something like climate change is this earth, this pale blue dot in the middle of the universe that we're sitting on, not in the middle, but not at the center, by
Hmm.
the way.
Hmm.
um, is all we have. And every ounce of the meaning of our lives is tied to this rock that we are sitting on. And we must protect it. We absolutely have no choice but to give what we can to protect this. And it's going to take sacrifice and it's going to take cooperation. And we can be the group that fights the hardest for that.
Hmm.
We can be a group not that does it all on our own. God doesn't, climate change doesn't care whether we believe in a God or not. And we're going to have religious allies for this.
Uh-huh.
But we can be a group that takes it upon ourselves to lead the way.
Absolutely. And that we're just about out of time. What does the little
Yeah.
timer say under your screen? Is it about
It
15
says
minutes?
49:43, and I've got to get to a
Okay.
meeting, actually.
Do you have time for one quick question?
Sure.
Just what do you think humanism's biggest challenges are for the future?
Uh, just one little question, right?
Sorry.
No
Following
problem.
on
So
your comments you were just making.
I think that the biggest thing that we need to do as people who have a humanistic outlook on life is we need to recognize that the for most of us the greatest meaning that we can find in life comes through human relationships, and that those human relationships have got to be meaningful beyond just our jobs and even beyond our immediate families, because we place way too much pressure on our partners, our spouses, or even our children if we build our entire life's meaning around close connection with only them. We want to be part of a group of people, and as evolutionary biologists like David Sloan Wilson will point out, a smallish group of people, a group of people in the dozens or hundreds, that comes together and celebrates and makes life meaningful together. And it's going to take units of those people to save the earth, to improve our economy, to to preserve human life and to make it better. And it's also going to give us tremendous joy to be part of that, even through the sad moments in our lives. And that coming together in a new way that has not been seen. We haven't had that secular community revolution. We haven't had a community revolution since the beginning of agriculture 10,000 years ago.
Hmm.
But that true revolution that we could have, where we really come together in secular ways, can change the quality and the caliber of human life. It can really transform our experience. It can be incredibly. My life is way better because I'm part of a community of people who are trying to make one another's lives much better. I've seen it. I think I got into community building work because I was the kind of person that did tend to isolate myself.
Hmm.
And I've had all these great people that surround me help me to open up. And now I feel like I should do that for others, and it can make a huge difference, and we can really do a lot of good for the world. It's not a panacea. It's not a universal solution. It's not going to change everything, and we're going to have plenty of imperfections in ourselves, in myself, and in our communities. But we can address them together in a systematic way using the insights of social science, and we can improve a lot. And that's all for
Okay.
now. We'll see what happens.
Well, that sounds great, Greg. And thanks again. Thanks so much for joining us and taking the time. And it's great to
Yeah.
hear that your organization is really thriving and that you're doing so well.
Well, I invite people to come visit online at humanisthub.org, or physically if they can make it down here, and go check out some of the other great communities that are out there. And if you find a community that isn't quite what you want it to be, then improve it, work on it, help, and we'll see lots of growth in the next few years.
Okay. Well, thanks again. Really appreciate it. And
My
hope
pleasure.
to talk again soon.
All right, take care,
Take
Michael.
care. Thanks.